The first cause of the American Civil War is the election of 1860. Lincoln won this election, and this election was very close. And basically, it was divided between people who wanted slavery and those who, well, didn't want slavery. The Republicans hated slavery, and the Democrats loved slavery. Lincoln's victory seemed like a threat to the Southern way of life because it was deeply tied to slavery. Lincoln was not even on the ballot in most Southern states. South Carolina and several other states seceded from the Union soon after, leading to the outbreak of the Civil War. The next cause of the American Civil War is the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Kansas was called Bleeding Kansas because the state was fighting if it was going to be pro-slavery or anti-slavery. This caused widespread violence across the state. Any compromise between the region would be very difficult. This event led to the Republican Party. Overall, this led to the national debate over slavery. Another cause of the American Civil War is the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott, an enslaved man, sued for his freedom after living in free territories. The case reached the Supreme Court, which ruled against Scott. The ruling declared that slavery could not be restricted in federal territories, effectively opening all territories to slavery. Seeing the decision as evidence that the South was intent on expanding slavery everywhere, the Republicans were not happy. The decision convinced many Northerners that the federal government was dominated by a slave power. The Supreme Court was now seen as a tool of pro-slavery forces in the South. Many Northerners who had previously been neutral on slavery became alarmed by the slavery expanding into their free states. The final cause of the American Civil War is the Fugitive Slave Act. The act required citizens in free states to return escaped enslaved people to their enslavers, even if they had reached free territory. Northerners saw the act as a violation of states, empowered federal commissions to issue warrants and orders for the return of escaped slaves with rewards for capturing them, obviously. The Fugitive Slave Act helped push the country closer to the Civil War because it proved that the North and the South can't live together peacefully. They must fight. One of the most important battles that led to the American Civil War was the Battle of Gettysburg. The Battle of Gettysburg, fought in Pennsylvania, it was the largest battle of the Civil War with over 50,000 casualties. This was a turning point in the war as it marked the first devastating defeat for General Lee. Another important battle was the Battle of Chickamauga. The Confederates won a decisive victory, but the Union Army was able to retreat, leading to a long siege at Chattanooga, which ended in a Union victory. The final important battle was the Battle of the Wilderness. It marked the start of Ulysses S. Grant's campaign. Grant refused to withdraw. Instead, he continued marching to Richmond. This war really didn't have a winner, but it did pave the way for the collapse of the Confederacy. One new technological innovation was the rifled muskets. The rifled muskets replaced smoothbore muskets, which only could fire around 100 and 200 feet. But this one, it could go a lot further. Soldiers didn't know where they were when they were being shot at because it was so far away. That's why there were so many deaths in Gettysburg. Another new technological innovation was the railroads. The railroads carried the troops to places they wouldn't have been able to go on foot. Also, not to mention supplies. In 1862, Confederate forces used railroads to concentrate troops for the Battle of Chickamauga, achieving a big victory. The final new technological innovation was the ironclads, a big boat that could withstand traditional cannon fire. And the boats that had these were most commonly USS Monitor and the CSS Virginia. The introduction of ironclads marked the end of wooden warships' dominance. The top five most important people were Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee, Frederick Douglass, and Harriet Tubman. Lincoln was the leader of the Union, guided the Union to victory, and laid the groundwork for the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. Grant was the most successful Union general. He gained control of the Mississippi River and split the Confederacy. Lee was the leading general of the Confederate Army and a symbol of Southern resistance. Douglas became a national leader of the abolitionist movement. Harriet Tubman saved over 300 slaves to freedom in a 10-year time span. The Civil War made black people free. They were free from the slavery in the South. They could go to the North. The war also made black people join the army. They were organized into the United States Colored Troops. Freed people established schools, churches, and mutual aid societies after the war. After the war, women played very important roles as nurses, teachers, and even doctors. Also, after the war, many women saw that it was the right time to fight for women's rights, which they would get in the 1920s, around 60 years. Women, especially in the South, face extreme hardships due to the destruction of infrastructure, loss of male labor, and shortages of basic supplies. One major impact of the war was that Black people got their freedom they wanted. Over 4 million gained their freedom by the end of the war. This was the first step to the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Another major impact of the war was the federal government grew in strength with taxation and greater involvement in infrastructure development. The war boosted northern industries such as weapons, manufacturing, railroads, and textiles. The Civil War accelerated an industry, leading to the United States becoming a major global economic power by the late 19th century.